So let me grab a pen. And I have had a few to drink, so, this is going to be interesting. Anywho. So what is the best way to be in life? Hierarchy, yes? It's an interesting thing. It's fascinating, almost like training grounds, right? Other humans and different things like that. Well, they're easily to predict, easily to control because you're around them. But what about other life forms themselves? These are variables, again, unknown. And seek this as your training, I guess. If you happen upon a planet of life forms, well, some people speak in code, right? And then you have to break the codes, yes? But it works when they're unsuspecting. So let's say if we have a planet of life forms on here, assuming that there are life forms, we would class these as a very low grade of ET. What's the one way to collect data on these? Well, you would have to look. And they reveal themselves to you with the data that you see. And as you look, you learn. You learn about them. Stack the favor against you, and true hierarchy means that they don't know you, so there has to be a counter to this. So where you look, you see. They don't see. They don't see you all. Where you learn them, or they don't know you. Now, who has the truer advantage in this scenario, if we think about it? So if we take humanity for argument's sake, a lot can be seen by satellite, especially moving and mining. And again, it depends on how much you've come across, really. The abundance, periodic table metastasized into multiple periodic tables. Now, again, this is an interesting thing. The periodic table is not static. It's only static when you accept it as static. Static being that it follows the laws of the cycles. If it follows the cycles from point, well, it's probably not really A to B. But again, let's say if we go from A to B, and then B converts back into A to B, so forth and so on, it becomes a cycle. Now, assuming that you knew that you could amplify the cycle because you've looked, you see, you've learnt, you understand. Now, never whether it's perfect or not, but you know to take the cycles further. And by doing so, that perhaps this is iron and this is some level of super iron, because rather than going from A to B in the natural state, you take it from A to B. And when it reaches B here, you continue on with the periodic table all the way through to C. If you have enough time, if you have enough resources, if you have enough understanding, then you make a type of super iron, let's say. Now, whether this ends up becoming soft, so the next one over will probably be more of a solid, perhaps a few more softies, and then a few solids, and then a few softies, either way it goes. So you look at the universe and you understand that in its natural state, it will run through this process from here to here to here, and then it will begin to recycle. And then it will start off again, and maybe it will do a little bit better, maybe it will do a little bit worse, but either or, it always reaches a recycling process. And then we understand what drives this process. So then you might begin to look in with telescopes, microscopes, whatever, atomic, see it happen, molecule by molecule, atom by atom, things slamming together. And that's on the small scale. And then you put in a variable, which you are the variable, making variable universe a varied place to be. And yes, we understand that it creates XYZ versus star. This particular star is going to give an ingredient at the outcome. If left natural, it's going to create iron by this much. There's few other ingredients on the periodic table, X, Y, and Z ingredients. And how much abundance? You do this with a few stars. Now imagine that we could fast forward it if, and you begin to play with that, and you see a few stars come out and they give you the same outcome each time. Okay, mathematics. All right, fair enough. Now you've done 2 stars in this process if you'll live long enough to see it. And they give you the same X, Y, and Z process. And the ingredients, by and large, from these 2 identical stars with identical planets forming around them give the same ingredient outcome as what goes in. What comes out is, by and large, it's equal. Okay? If you've lived long enough to see it, you might not start noticing that most of them that are like this produce this type of XYZ. That's naturally producing the XYZ. And it comes out with these types of resources or periodic table identically at this much. This is how much I get from here and what ingredients I get at the outcome of that process that burnt for this long, yada, yada, yada. But then you factor in something else. You create the same star and then perhaps you subject it to multiple stars. Its energy, it orbits around, but it always stays this way. We keep it stable and we add in extra heat. Say for argument's sake. And you do this identical with some other stars, perhaps, maybe, if you've got the numbers to do so. Seems science fiction and seems like we've just resurrected hunter-gatherers and tell them about a world that is with flying aircraft, this, that, and the other, and they're like, unbelievable. You're talking shite. And then you show them it, and they melt. Now, with this different ingredient, it's going to give you a different periodic table. Now, let's say if we would say that it reaches here and no farther, but it gives you this much iron at this percentage. Let's say, I don't know, let's say it gives you 90% iron and then what, 10% anything else in small 0.1% of all the rest of the periodic table is minus the 10%. This one gives you it at 90%, and that's the standard XYZ ingredients. Same star, same ingredients, although you might have altered with the heat, the intensity, how long you cook it for, slow it down, speed it up, and then it gives you a completely different, some stuff that you've never seen before, which may go on to this side here. Ingredients that you've never seen before. And perhaps more of an abundance of these, but still, we get more out of it. And we learn something else because we've seen it in its natural environment, and we've changed the natural environment to be abnormal as possible, right? Because that's what life forms really are, aren't they? They're the most abnormal parts of the Soho, yeah? And we get different ingredients, and then we learn that if we keep going with this, and the more we add, the more we do, the more we change, the more the outcome keeps changing, and then before you know it, we've gone way past what's currently normal in the universe. We've created a variable, multiple variables, periodic table, and now if we look at these ingredients together, so we've got this particular iron on this one natural, and then we have another type of iron ratio in this area here, and we have another one here. And then we test each and every single one. Now, we would understand that the standardized iron, which I'm going to do blue, and then we've got the next one up where we've played around with the ingredients, and it's produced something very similar, but not quite. Now we're going to do red. And then we're going to say the super iron, so we've got super iron is going to be, we'll say red, super iron, nice. Then we've got the standard cycled iron, so just iron will be blue. Let's go for that. And then we've got a super iron, okay? Never before seen, and that's in black. Now, perhaps because this ingredient has been widely spread, abundance, we test this particular iron, and it gives an outcome. It's good for this, it's good for that. It rusts, it breaks down, it does all of these weird and wonderful things that you would expect from it. Years and years worth of cataloging that ingredient. But this one, you then move the tests over to this one. And this one's stress test is strong, but this one is much more stronger. And then there comes another question, right? Because if iron is inside your blood, which we can understand that, so this one becomes, we know what happens when it's in the blood, because then you have a standard vessel, which would be a standard human or vessel or any life form animal. And it requires this type of iron. Stinger nettle requires this type of iron, well known, well abundant, well in the universe as the natural state. Now, we've gone past that and we've reached the other side, but hey, it looks like iron. Now, whether that is soft, malleable, and the other one is a bit more harder, and the next one is super harder than that. The difference is, with that, what happens if I now subject this one to life? What happens if you redesign life upon this iron? Is it better at working through the body? Then this one becomes quite bad or poor or standard, but this one gives you extra abilities. Now, what does that stress test look like? Now, perhaps it doesn't work, perhaps it does. Perhaps this one worked better in certain aspects. So what happens now if we do another test and we combine both of these irons? We understand them to be very similar. We create two different types. So we take a blue iron of standardized iron, and we also mix in this new version here, and we add this together, and then we test it. Now we've got a different type of outcome. Entirely, never seen before. Interesting. So what does that do to the life forms? Again, interesting. And then we move over to the next one. And we also test its strength, and we find out it's more stronger, it's able to cope with this, it can take crushing depths, it can get really hot, and it doesn't penetrate through it, it's nigh on indestructible, perhaps it's harder, perhaps it's softer, or vice versa. But you now start to learn this stuff. And you've got life forms that are on a planet that only know the ingredients that are on the planet, which has been given. We'll call those given ingredients already there. So not only are you looking at life forms and learning from them, learning them all, you look and see, you understand what they eat, you understand what they do, you understand how they respond, you understand their fear, you understand what wipes them out. You may even throw into there what keeps them alive for longer, what makes them more stronger, what makes them more weaker. And at the same time, these have no idea what you're made of. So they don't know what makes you defeated, what causes you to find your weakness, your kryptonite. Nope, because you're hidden. And you seem to build this database. They can't see you, so therefore that's one good thing, I suppose. You're gaining a lot of intelligence, it's unsuspecting. Could you subject these on there to different types of what happens if I experiment with this? Put a little bit of this in, add a little bit of these ingredients. What is the outcome? How does that work? Perhaps you wouldn't give that just in case it makes them super, so you probably take them away from the ingredient and probably test a bit like what happens if we take a blobfish from the deep in the ocean and bring it up? What happens if we give it a little bit of this chemical, a little bit of that, play around with this, move the oxygen here, shift this? What happens if we subject them to light over a few years? What happens if we subject these ones to no light? What happens if we subject these ones to a different type of medium altogether? Let's keep going. Water and oxygen and carbon and all of these other things will come out of this, perhaps in a very different way. Standardized, you get standardized water. What about purification in this? What happens if we take the version in here of oxygen, but it's done in a different way? We see it and perceive it as being, we see the link. It reminds us of oxygen, but this oxygen now becomes a solid as opposed to a gas state. Interesting, the way it happens. You get soft metals and you get hard metals. Go again and it shifts. It seems to flip from one to the other, almost back and forth, like breathing. Well, you'd expect it because the way the universe works, right? In and out, pulsating in seasons and all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff. So why would it be that if you go any further past the standardized cycle, so the universe's maximum capability that it will ever create in the X amount of time that it exists for, in the way that it formats, in the way that it expands and contracts, it will only ever make these ingredients here on the periodic table. Now, that's universal intelligence, and it seems very intelligent to you. The more you grow and explore and play around with this stuff, you become more intelligent than it. Never ever underestimate the intelligence overall that it gave you a place to exist, to play, a playground. You then take the stars and say, what happens if I move the stars this way? What happens if I throw these ingredients in? What happens if I cook these up in a lab and put these into a star and throw these ingredients in? Does it go farther than the periodic table? And what you'll probably find is the next one overlaps and you've made equal amount to what the universe can create in a whole particular cycle. And assuming that there's a life cycle here. Why are you here? Good question. Can be any reason that you want it to be. And you take another layer over the top of it and these next ingredients begin to, and you only get this far based on the time, based on this. But when you compare these two together and overlap them, you understand that this one reminds you of iron, but it's soft, squidgy iron. And this one's a hard iron. Then you go for another booklet, another thing, and now you're moving more and more ingredients. Now, what happens if we start a star with these new ingredients that is never seen before? The unnatural combined with the natural, although you're created by the natural, so therefore you are natural as a byproduct, but you're able to do more things with these ingredients. Anyway, let's just assume that you can. By the time you lay the third booklet over, the third page, so you've got periodic table after periodic table after periodic table on top of this, and see how far you can keep on going. Let's say you survive the cycle. Therefore, these ingredients are going to grow. For sure, you're going to learn about them. You're going to understand them. But what say if you understand the carbon as carbon on this one? And once where you have a gas in a separatedness, you perhaps get a different type of response. And what can that be? That can be anything that you want it to be. Let's be realistic. Where does it end? Where does it start? Multiple this. If we see a diamond like this and it's this hard, what happens if you get another type of looks like a diamond, sort of seems like a diamond, but is now a squidgy diamond? You can compress it. As soon as you let go, it flops back out into the diamond, and it's still as strong as the diamond at keeping together, but however, it's changed its composition from one to another to another to another. Oh, bizarre as thing as it may be. You would learn this stuff, and as you keep going, you would have to ask the questions of stress testing these ingredients afterwards. What happens if I factor these into life? Well, if this is similar to iron, what happens if I incorporate this iron? Oh, that happened. Well, did it work? Didn't it? Well, maybe it had some benefits in one aspect and maybe the other one had benefits in the other. What happens if you combine both of these? Well, maybe there's a dual benefit. Maybe it doesn't work at all. X, Y, Z. And then if you come past another super iron, let's say, but I don't know, we're going to look at it this way. What happens if you subject life to that? Especially your own species before you do it to anything else. Would you experiment with that? Be like having lots of blobfish in tanks, multiple tanks. How many tanks can I make? Whew, you're going to need multiple variations on that. Now, subject these life forms to this. By that time, you would have picked up on your technology, because not only are you looking and learning about other life forms, you're also looking at your own life forms and your own species and your own nature, assuming that you have nature and different things like that. You're going to experiment with those exactly the same way that you're going to experiment with anything else while learning other life forms entirely. In order to get an edge on life forms, the greatest way to do it is to observe the life forms. They tell you everything they need to know. Maybe you need to go down and orchestrate a few events in order to see how they respond to these events, which then gives you more data in body language, patterning, coding, and understanding. So you might need to make a few events. How does that respond? Like this, and this. Okay, all right. Again, but you're never going to tell them. It's supposed to be unsuspected. They won't know it's you. That's a very interesting thing, isn't it? Process. What would be the best way to do this? Well, hidden. Plus all of these tests are hidden. It's not exactly you're going to release all of this information. Probably not. The more you begin to play with the universe, does it unlock more abilities for you as a vessel? Especially if you're able to incorporate this stuff. Now, the interesting thing is that if we understand then, that if we traverse across the universe and we find lots of ETs and we notice a pattern emerging, the variables in these are quite placid, nice, kind and friendly. But there are some others that are very aggressive, very angry, and very much all about control taking over and everything else. Now, it depends on where you stand in this, because this pyramid structure, if you want to call it that, this particular structure, some are going to be watching in order to protect themselves. Some are going to be watching to enhance what they are, to get a lead over everything else, to dominate it. And you will have a lot of different variables in that do what you will. Usually works in threes. Perhaps it could even be fours, but usually threes. This pattern then gives you a lot of information because you've traveled out, you've seen it, you've seen different life forms, you've seen the way the universe's cycles happen, you've seen the way that you can manipulate the stuff, you can create stronger stuff. And even in this process of creating stronger stuff, then getting the lead on anything else would be to create better metals, some that they've never seen or ever cooked up. And then where does the intelligence race really begin? Well, it begins in knowing how many different ingredients that you can make and how much stronger that they come, that if any life forms, unsuspecting or otherwise, that might rise up and they're really aggressive, well, it wouldn't really matter because your stuff is nigh on indestructible. So no matter what they threw at you, it would just bounce off you. That's self-defense. You can traverse from here to there, even if they did see you, nothing they could do could actually destroy you based on this process here. So therefore, it creates a grade of hierarchy in this, and then who is the ahead on this. And then it makes you wonder, what type of balanced temperament are these vessels? Interesting. And perhaps you've played around with your own life forms. You've genetically modified your own creatures, your own species. I don't know. You've mixed different life forms with other different life forms, and you've removed them on a planet somewhere, and you'll watch how they grow. Now, they could become really intelligent. Super intelligent really quickly, and perhaps they might be very aggressive. Or they could be very loving. Very loving, well, that's easy to work with. Very aggressive, a little bit more trickier to do so. Anyway, to be able to traverse the whole of the universe and make it towards the end, and it recycles again, you might want to, in a hierarchy sense, which in this you would know if there were other life forms, and you come together for a common agreement and make an order. What would that order look like? That would be interesting. Let's say you travel through the whole of the universe and you had to meet incredible amounts of life forms that were very, very aggressive. But your capabilities were super strong, and usually you were quite placid, self-defense mechanisms. Usually life forms are quite intelligent enough to look at certain other life forms and think, yeah, I ain't starting on those. They look a little bit equipped, and therefore it becomes a self-defense mechanism without ever needing to state it. Pecking order and everything else. Anyway, you could join an alliance with others that are a bit more like-minded. And perhaps you've spent a time where you've had to run into battles with others, and you've had to eliminate them, or perhaps be eliminated in the process. Interesting, really, isn't it? That type of thing. And it all depends on who wins and at what perspective they win in the final winter sleep of the universe, let's say. While that's shutting down, you're creating up 4 and 4, 8 and 8, 16. 16, 1 and 6 is 7, 50 pence piece. Interesting. Symbology. Anyway, and yeah, let's say that you're in this final stage, and a lot of you like-minded in that. Doesn't mean that you can never fall out, but it's unlikely to after this long. And you've taken out a lot of competition, accidentally or on purpose, either or. The next universal cycle that's going to happen, and perhaps you don't do this on the first, or the second, or the third, or the fourth. Who knows? Take your pick. You know that life forms are going to rise up. So in order to get your capabilities up, you're going to need a temporal zone, aren't you? A neutral zone where if any life forms do rise up, that you're going to be very quick to jump to these particular places. And you would know this, so therefore you would build instruments in the quiet zone of trying to detect life forms. And if you've got enough of them, and you can engineer these into multiple biomes whilst you're inside the finer winter rest, you're going to test these against your life form variables that you have. Make them as primitive as possible and try and dial them backwards. Never mind going forwards. Going backwards is also an equal prize. So you're going to tune your instruments to be able to pick up life signals. You're also going to be able to try and see in the darkness. It's going to teach you to see in darkness. It's also going to teach you to see in light. It's also going to teach you about all of the light and darkness and make you nigh on impenetrable to the stuff. Because you're neutral. You're neither a part of it, but you are a part of it, but you're a part inside it. That's an interesting thing. You still make up its mass by being inside it, but it just can't affect you. You become neutral to it. That's what you want to be, neutral to the universe. No matter at what stage it's at, you become neutral. Think about that. If you're neutral in an environment of weather, constant change, but no matter what the environment throws at you, it never affects you, ever. Whether that is flood, whether that is drought, whether that is depletion of water or resources, or the star explodes, or anything else, meteorites, No matter what happens around you, you are neutral. Doesn't affect you at all. Won't even wipe out your species in the slightest form. That's a good place to be, right? Same in the universe. So it teaches you with this environment, the way that it is, up and down, changing constantly. You try and get very neutral in it. You defy it. And you become more and more neutral, and the easier it becomes. This particular planet, tick. We understand ones like Earth. Next one, Mars, the tick. You'll find that a lot of your capabilities will already land onto these places anyway. Once you've mastered them here, self-fulfilling prophecy, recycle, this, that, and the other. So you're on a neutral zone. If you've been for a few cycles, you then start to notice another pattern. This keeps repeating. How can I make this so that I don't have to defend myself so much? Well, you could create your instruments to focus in on life signals and be able to see where they are, assess them, find out what they're all about. Would you do this? Yes, you would. You do it to your own species. It's already encoded into you. It's a pattern. And it's a self-defense pattern, as long as we don't get distracted on the pattern of going for the wrong types. That's interesting because, how do you know which ones are correct and which ones aren't? That one truly remains inside, right? Is it bendable? Is it pliable? Is it here to destroy us or help us? Or is it both? Or is it just neutral? That's an interesting one. That one remains the last piece of the puzzle, doesn't it? And you base this up on evidence and different things like that. Yeah, because you may be able to see a human doing this here. But is it really? When does it neutral zone? Where is it? Where's it at? Is it here? Or is it when it gets back to home? When it gets back to hub? When it gets back to headquarters? So forth and so on, The soldier itself might not be very interesting, but put that same soldier into its capability mode around its resources that it needs, and it can strategize and wipe out the enemy. Just from one soldier getting back, it now knows the enemy. Then it makes a decision which is calculated enough to wipe out. Anyway, this is a weird thing because it's war structures and it's very fearful in some aspects and quite prideful in others. So when you notice this pattern of it repeating and these life forms keep rising up, then I'll ask another question. Would humanity then need to get ahead in order to get up the hierarchy spectrum? That's an interesting thing. So it could mean that you suspend all life forms. Could you make capability of suspending life forms in animation, suspended animation? Perhaps it's just not in your nature to wipe them out, and it's to keep them, but to slow them down. Now ask yourself a question. Can you slow life forms down? And the answer is yes, surprisingly easy. So if you went around collecting all the life forms that were going to rise up, at the meantime, you would be using the universe as your leisure in order to strengthen your capabilities so that you get a faster edge on any of these life forms before they rise up. And you might argue that that might be some sort of creator out there. It might be their sort of, they're doing the same thing or have done the same thing. So you're never truly more advanced than the creator itself. Interesting. And again, if the creator is deep rooted within you, then it sees what you're doing and will already be able to find a way to counteract you if you were to use it in the wrong way. You never know. Or maybe it's doing nothing. Would you ever want to find that out? Probably not. Because again, if you're able to do this, is something else able to do this, considering that this has been teaching you how to do this? Where did that teaching come from? Where did that knowledge come from? Where did it come from? That's an interesting thing. Why are we here? What are we here for? Interesting sort of questions. And there again, it teaches you a little bit of respect because you don't know whether it could strike you back or not, or wipe you out, or learn your capabilities. All you know is enough to know that that is a self-defense mechanism without ever raising a single sword, weapon, or going to battle with. Anyway, Birch then sorts you out whether you would want to do that. Probably not. That would be suicide. Anyway, so let's say you could suspend the life forms and then go drop them out and let them go on the next one. That'd be interesting. Interesting sort of process entirely. Then this will give you another understanding about all of those life forms that you suspended. That's interesting. That's if you could journey the universe to do this. Then it means about numbers, and you would need an X amount of numbers because the pattern seems similar, although not identical, but very similar in nature indeed. Then you would have to build up your numbers. I'm not saying that it's impossible. Still, it seems impossible from the mindset, doesn't it? But when you've gone through it, you sort of get confident with it. Can you expand your species? The answer is yes. Could you expand your species to clone? The answer is also yes. And that's if your nature is doing it, you see it, it's prepping you, it's a pattern, it comes out. This pattern you want to apply, learn, and adapt. Why? Because that looks like something we could really use. We could really do with this sort of process. Why? Because it expands your numbers. Expansion of numbers and a decent amount of resources around you. Well, kind of make the snail shell around each species, don't you? And the more of you there are, the more expansion there can be. That's interesting. Probably we'll get onto another video about wrapping up parts of the universe to make it look smaller than it actually is. That's an interesting thing. It's all about finding the neutral zone. We was talking about that. Atmosphere and space, and somewhere in between that is a zero or a neutral barrier. One where one doesn't respond to the other and each one's influence is cancelled out past a certain moment. That is the neutral ground. That's an interesting thing. If you can figure out a neutral zone and then you can find out how to mask a neutral zone, then you can separate space. Now that's an interesting thing. And again, if it's possible to do so, it makes you ask the question that if you can do it, has something else done it to you? And therefore your numbers are way too small on the spectrum to even be able to build up to that. And by the time you do, and you've understood knowledge, and perhaps you bust through their neutral layer, perhaps you see more than meets the eye. And maybe it's a bit like fractals, and there's another inside another inside another. Who knows where it ends? Who knows where it starts? The problem is that if they're not interfering with you, and whereas you know, and you're not interfering with them, it seems to be good. The cycles seem to continue. Cycles will still work in this process. That's possible as well. Anyway, now let's say if we get onto the whole understanding of what programs brains. That's an interesting one as well. So not only are you learning from other life forms, no, not only have you got a head on other life forms and understood more than meets the eye, and some of these gifts given to life forms at certain stages would blow their minds quite literally to the possibilities. It opens Pandora's box. Can also limit them by restricting it from them. Not only are you learning about that, you could be learning about these life forms. Well, what makes this particular, we'll take a fish for example, what makes a fish a fish? Now, is it the environment? Well, partly, yeah. But what makes it know all of this? And why can't it see this? Why can't it think this? Why do these ones know how to think this but not this? And by then you probably have some more capabilities as well to understand the brain inside the depths of the brain. Thoughts, processes, where did this all come from? Maybe you'll stumble over something else with your equipment and your capabilities because you begin to learn inwardly, outwardly, around you, and you would also understand the greater theme of things. And the more patterns that reveal themselves, the more you see, the more you understand. And not only that, the more you get to play around with, because your arsenal of knowledge plus resources plus this and capability allows you to tweak the outcome. And then it'll probably be about, can you make life forms themselves? Now that's an interesting thing. But what about if you make a brain? Similar to programming a computer. A computer is empty, mindless. How does it know to be a computer? It's shaped, isn't it? You program it. And then you start to ask these questions. What allows your capabilities? You know, all this time we've been putting all resources into instruments, cameras and telescopes, and perhaps you've been going a decent way and it's got you very far with these tools. But these tools then begin to reach their limits. What happens if you could tweak the brain instead? Reprogram the brain is another way to say it. What happens if you could enhance these to make them better? Or adaptable at will would be a better tool entirely, wouldn't it? Wouldn't you think so? You wanted to see during the dark, you train the brain to see in a type of frequency, put in a little bit of programming that understands how to utilize this particular light that's happening. And that would be a weird thing. Can I delete certain things from the brain? That's an interesting thing. Can I enhance the brain? What's this part of the brain for? Can we make more of it? Oh, wait, it's evolving. Can we change this? Can we alter that? Does it have to be stuck? Why is it fixed? Who made it fixed in this position? Again, this becomes a very interesting thing. And then before you know it, you're combining a bit of both and then you're excelling the other one. You can use this with AI even now. You can excel the brain. Each time you excel one and the other, it's always playing catch up. One reaches the ceiling, which then becomes the floor. And then the other one catches up. and then sort of surpasses it, and then reprograms the AI technology, understands a little bit more, and then lifts this one, becomes above by comparison. And then the species catch up, and then surpass it, and then reach a buffer zone. And then again, they retranslate the information and help the AI to understand. Perhaps chips, processing and development, and with the new resources, perhaps better ways of surging energy through them more quicker. Who knows what it may be? And then you climb up, climb up, climb up, climb up. When does it stop? When does this happen? Yeah, it'd be great to be able to utilize the systems in the brain to build the brain to evolve. And then what happens if you take it out? Does the species fall down again, or does it stay that intelligent? And then what's the envelope of that intelligence? Well, it's multiple, because then not only are you learning about yourself, and once you've reached the limits of that, are you becoming a god? Well, perhaps not. Are you trapped in a biome? Probably not, because you do have the opportunity to leave it at any time you want. What goes on beyond that? That becomes an interesting question in itself. And again, if you're cloning, you are able to reach more and more of a barrier towards death. Death becomes something that was once first feared, right? But if you know that you weren't going to die, but reach the peak of death and begin to learn it, that's an interesting thing. And each time you push the barrier a little bit further, you know you're not going to die. But your awareness of the death, how far can you push that capability back to be able to see more of what's happening at this moment? Do you reach the end? And then all of a sudden you have another jump and a leap and advancement and making a capability to see even more? What's the difference between seeing it and think you see it? There's another thing entirely. What coded the brain to stop you from seeing that? What coded the brain to know that you needed this? What coded the brain in order for it to create this, pump your heart, breathe, accelerate, create the chemicals that you needed? I mean, it poses a lot of questions, doesn't it? What or who created that? Now, we could say life forms coming together and evolved in this way, but again, they still had a lot of knowing. Then it's tapping into that knowing. What about evolution and everything like that? And death. Death only becomes scary because I guess it's what the unknown. People fear the unknown, I think. It's probably it. You fear more the unknown. There probably is a wonderful oasis at the end of it. And there also might not be. That's your decision to make that up yourself. But again, if you're making cloning and you can tap into this, whether it's through technology and be able to have a chip from one to the other and be able to send this data to and fro, but be able to see the last moments before the vessel becomes too much, boosh, off it goes. You'll be able to work that out. And then it opens up Pandora's box. What happens if you record this? Assuming that you could record in capabilities, see it 3D, however raw. You see those final moments, and then you've got a database of these final moments, and how many people would actually keep going to study this as a science as to what's next? And then perhaps you see it to a certain point, and then you expand the capabilities a little bit more, be able to stretch the wave format, because time, if we understand time from a vessel, from a different vessel's perspective, time is very different. And we slow it down. When we say that we're slowing something down, are we really saying that we're getting into the mindset of a snail, perhaps, that doesn't register explosions very much? Before the explosion happened, and then we see it as a pigeon. Fucking hell. They're gone before the nuclear bomb detonates. That's interesting. They seem to feel that before the effects come, and they're off. So their processing ability is much more faster, we would say. And then we've got different reflexes of cats, reflexes. Egyptians were fascinated with reflexes. I do understand that. And then why are these pitted at this speed? And then does that affect their time, process of time? And again, what happens if we apply a snail's understanding at that speed? Just before you get to death, what you have seen in a split second, you've broken down to a snail, which is in multiple nanoseconds inside that, which can then give you a lot more data until something begins to look back. That would be an interesting process entirely then, wouldn't it? What? And then if, question mark, is there a way to communicate with? Is there something that it wants? Is there messages that can be sent? Is there a proudness? Is it empty? Is it this? Is it the end? Or is there more? I think the more that you grow into this science, at the moment, science is limited because you can't clone. If you could clone and you were able to see the last moments, this information would be passed over, perhaps to a database and a filter. But if you knew that you weren't going to die, why would you fear it? You wouldn't. So therefore it'd make you more curious then, wouldn't it? You only become really curious when you know that perhaps something is not going, it's not going to end, so I become more curious about this mystery. But, you know, I don't know if you have much curiosity on electrocution if you know that it could kill you, and it's more than likely to kill you. But let's say if it couldn't kill you and you could collect data from it, assuming that you could get past the interference of the electricity doesn't fry everything and create an EMP inside the electronic, would you then be more curious as to why you're being electrocuted? That's another thing. And if you couldn't die at the end of it and you knew you weren't going to die, but your passion was to work out electricity, perhaps by touching it, feeling it, experiencing it, and dying from it multiple times, interesting, and probably getting intelligent along the way, a few variables in there for good measure. Would you study it more? Yes, you would lose the fear. Why? Because you're not going to die. Therefore, the information would weigh greater. That's an interesting thing. Or being eaten by something. It's a bit brutal, but I'm pretty sure people would like to look at that. What happens? What does it feel like? Curious, right? If you know you're not going to die, that's the thing. Would you try it? Probably. Daredevil, adrenaline junkie, and all the rest of it, but still. And it makes you ask something else as well. Is there a way to strengthen the body? To strengthen the bonds? This particular part here. Anyway, now whether we want to say that this is an actual representation, probably not. It's just pretty and looks good, and it gives me the figure of 8, and I kind of love that. So maybe it's closer than it appears to be. Who knows? Doesn't matter whether it is accurate or not. But let's say we take 3 strands of what makes up the human vessel. And we've got 3 strands, and then we add another 3 strands that have been plaited together and another 3 strands that have been plaited together. You've now made 3 into 3. Can I now strand and bind these together? Yes. Would it happen naturally? No. However, are you natural? Yes. But can you do the unnatural? Well, yes also. If the heart gives out, can I replace it with this? Yes. If this gives out, can I swap it with it? Well, yes, you can do that. And there you are, you're strengthening up already, but perhaps using a different ingredient to achieve it, such as resources, maybe stuff from the periodic table, and you're able to re-strengthen those bonds, which then might eventually, if you continue with building artificial hearts, make an indestructible heart. That's an interesting thing. Making the vessels live longer, and then the need for cloning becomes a lot less. It's still there, but still the demand drops because you live longer as the vessel itself. That's an interesting thing in itself as well. So let's say, which way could you do it? Well, perhaps the machine requires a few things, requires a few resources, and perhaps also breeding does. But which one requires less resources in order to achieve the outcome? You might argue that resources are abundant, yes, but if your species are very big, the abundance looks smaller, and you can shrink the whole universe down if you get too big because there isn't enough resources to go around and the mechanism doesn't continue. Anyway, that's an interesting thing. Then that might make you ask another question of, can we create more ingredients into this? The answer may be yes. How? That's an interesting question entirely, but again, if you're not there, it doesn't pose worth thinking about, really, does it? Trying to manifest more, if you want to call it manifest more hydrogen. Yeah, I suppose you don't have the need for it, and it appears to be abundant, so don't really need to know that. But if you could build your species big enough and the resources start to dwindle down, that might be a question you'd want to ask. Perhaps. Depends on where you sit on that, and it depends who else is already sitting there. That's another question entirely. So let's just say that the ingredients worked out that you could get more if you learned to bind what the body already has. Honestly, I think that shrinking down your species to being smaller is an interesting thing. The resources appear bigger by nature. Natural default, and it's an interesting thing. And then you need little of everything. Little amounts of food. You need little crafts. Little crafts means that you can make more of them. So if you're at this size and you need a big house like this, and the more houses you need, the smaller the planet becomes. It doesn't, but it appears to become smaller, and the resources get smaller. But what happens if you could shrink your species down? Half the size. What happens if the whole species turned into dwarfs? An interesting question. How much more resources would you need if you were a dwarf, as opposed to a giant in comparison? This one's going to need more resources than this one. And by default, to dwarfs, well, what looked like rations to someone who's bigger, who would require more energy in order to maintain that, if you can shrink yourself down even smaller, those resources have just got even bigger, and therefore your numbers become even more small and mighty. less susceptible to risk. And in some aspects, you're more susceptible to risk depending on whether you've sorted the animal ratio out and tamed them. Tame them before you shrink yourself. But again, we often look through history and we see that some people are like, what, 7 foot? Someone was in some sort of institution somewhere at 7 foot, perhaps 8, who knows? And then we're what, around average 5'9", 6 foot. I know what, you can be 3 foot. That's an interesting thing. What does that teach you already? What's that already showing you? A pattern emerging. What's that all about? Well, which one would be better in what scenario? When abundance are good and there's a lot of them, this size doesn't mind too much. But again, if you were to shrink half the size of what you are, then you can get 2 per 1. That's an interesting thing, isn't it? And the resources become in abundance. Less farming, less this, less food. If you could shrink down even further than that, imagine that you could. Or if you could shrink yourselves down to an ant? That's an interesting question in itself. The possibilities are endless, especially if you're playing around with cloning. What are you going to do? See if you can make the biggest clone? See if you can make the smallest clone? God-sized clone? Funny events? Who knows? What would you be able to do with that? Shrink it right the way down? And knowing that if you went into this process again, you could also expand what you are and go back up to normal default size or whatever your natural current size was, considering you've got taller and shorter throughout history as it is anyway. Which is your truest size? That's another question entirely. If you could shrink yourself down to an ant, what do the resources on your planet then look like? You could shrink the whole of humanity, every nation, down to a colony of ants. Then how big does the world become? Even bigger by comparison. That's like a Jupiter-sized Earth then, isn't it? Wow, interesting. And would you be able to take the pressure and everything else? That's another question entirely, but you would experiment. Everybody does, right? You would. And what happens if you learn to plait these? Plait what your makeup is. You get 3 strands of 3. Well, we know that plaits work really well when you can loop them over to one another and you make a good bond. It's very strong, lasts very long. That's pretty good. Now, if you did that 3 times of these plaiting of these 3 and these 3 and these 3. Most people, girls, will plait their hair once. Interesting. When I had long hair, I tried something. It was just to see whether it could. I tried to put my hair in dreadlocks. I left it all long and hanging down like Jesus. Some profiles I look like him. And anyway, and I also put it into a plait. I was just messing around with it. I was fascinated with how strong it is. And then I made very small plaits from this. And again, we're assuming that if, to me, I was thinking, what happens if I took 3? So I took one person and I plaited their hair. That's 3 plaits. Then I did somebody else and plaited their hair. And then somebody else and plaited their hair. I now have 3 strands. What happens if I then plait these together? And then formulate again with those 3 on top of 3 on top of 3 on top of 3 on top of 3. You get stronger and stronger plaits. The stronger the plait is. It's like a really thick rope. Now what happens if I can squash these together? Compact these really small, minus the humans. Give them a haircut. And I could squash these down. I'm going to make more and more firmer until I end up making a rhino's horn. We already know how strong they are. That's hair. Now, what happens if you could do this with your DNA structure or your makeup that makes you up as a human? What happens if you could plait this? What happens if you do it with all of the organs? Teach it to grow this way in the next clone. Now, we understand that perhaps in some aspects this is going to be really good, and in other aspects it shouldn't really be bad, but you still have mobility because all of the structures equally apply 1 extra strand of plaiting to it. And the next one plans extra 3, extra 4, extra 5. That's tendons, bone, muscle, skin, veins, everything. The lot. How much more strength is that going to be? So whereas a bow and arrow might penetrate through your arm, the next time it will bounce off because you are now stronger than that. Probably a bit like a bow and arrow at a rhino horn, doesn't really do much damage. That's interesting, isn't it? That's a very interesting structure right there. And to think it's just hair at the end of the day. How much more stronger as a species could you be? Resilient. That's an interesting thing. And then how better could you process the information through your brain? You could use AI, you could use technology like that. Sure, it's great starting point. No, but humans get bored, don't you? You do. So you will start asking more better quality questions as, what happens if we make the brain more of this? What happens if we play around with the stress? What happens if we make it so the current flows a little bit more better? I mean, do we think better if we're colder due to the resistance? So the more the energy, the electrons flow, the more resistance is created, right? There's heat, yes? So it slows down the energy's capacity to flow. Interesting. I want to put this into solar panels. The solar panels, if they got hot at the back, they're obviously going to be giving me less energy. What happens if I put hose pipe at the side here? And plus, I always want to get some heated water, the best of both worlds. Free energy and free hot water. Come on. And also it crippled the energy. How many solar panels would I need to heat a water tank? Ridiculous amount. Well, that's thinking hard, right? You say, what happens if I just put a hose pipe at the back of all the solar panels? They're going to get hot anyway. Well, to my little fucking surprise, I can also cool the waters down using this process. And then I can make more electrons flow. There's the theory. But then it made me think about the brain. What happens if we're hot in nature, and do we get hot? I often get hot, so much so that when making these types of videos, it feels like the temperature increases in the room. It's not, it's me. But the funny thing is, I also noticed that other people that are standing filming, they also get hot. They blame it on all sorts of weird and wonderful things. Oh, it's hot. But before we start the video, we're all shivering. It's very cold. It's an interesting thing, isn't it? So do you think that the more that the brain is generating this information, it's creating heat? And in that heat, how much is being limited to what you can think at the clarity of your thoughts? And if we can make a better brain, there's a limit to it, isn't there? Well, not a limit. There's a downside and a plus side. One, when you're in control of those thoughts, it's a little bit more, I suppose if you're not really in control of thoughts, but still. The processing, a little bit more so. But then when you go to sleep and rest, those night thoughts, which people call dreams, they're out of your control in that aspect. And therefore, if you're enhancing it here and you have a bad dream, my word, horror movies will be the thing. Dream your horror movies. Very vivid. Very strong. You can't have it both ways, I think. Maybe a way to limit that. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. So I guess it enhances what you are, but it also makes you indestructible slightly to a degree. It's never going to make you anything here. And then often you can look at these structures. What happens if you plait these objects together? You take iron and we plait these together. I mean, how much more can I lift on a crane? Interesting. If I plait or twizzle these strands, how much more can we pull on this? How much more can we make this? Trailer hitches and so forth and so on. How much more can it pull? These are the interesting things. It makes you more stronger, more resilient, more capable. And then how does that work for energy? Do you need to feed it more? Is it more energy efficient per the food that you eat? Do you end up wasting less, which probably better for a waste product in the environment as you ask these questions? Ooh, that's interesting. It always has a price. Everything has a price that you do. Interesting. Self-fulfilling prophecies are always the way to go. Being able to break it down yourself and also be able to recreate it and always have enough, more than enough. You don't want to be living like a snail when we understand the universe shuts down and hibernates and does so forth and so on, and we do too. You need to have more than enough to be able to get you through those times, that's for sure. Anyway, so you don't need a snail shell, you're going to need an abundance shell. But not too much. Yeah, and the way you can shrink yourselves down, you can make that even bigger. Anyway, I was losing my train of thought a little. Not really. So, yeah, often we find that we do these behaviors and don't often understand why we do them. Why are we doing this? Why is this, and this? Yeah, there's two ways to look at it. One, you've been taught by something and it's been scrambled a lot by control and perhaps trying to take over and perhaps a little bit of jealousy to a higher force. Maybe. It's possible. Who knows what the ancients were thinking, And learning how to talk is an interesting one for me. Isn't it? When you say talking is the most weirdest thing ever, it's got to go through so many processes in order to build a story, come back out and listen and hear and talk and exchange. It seems very outward as opposed to inward communication. This shuts down the link to a certain degree. But being outwardly talking, learning the language, learning this from a species, how much more do you understand? And if they were ever to be a problem, whether you go down and interfere with them or not, perhaps you don't want to disturb. Let's leave these animals. Let's leave these species. Let's go. Come on. We'll leave them to it. Sort of that sort of process. But at the same time, we'd still have to look and observe the way you are, wouldn't anything else? If you come across another planet, you would look, you would observe. Just in case there's going to be a problem later. Probably want to have some detailed data about those. And then there's calculation, isn't there? Calculation is an interesting thing. Being able to learn how to predict their next move, which is not their next move to a T. If they're going to go this way, are they going to go right or are they going to go left? Place your bets. Who bets what? What's their next thought process? No. I understand the process here. But apply it to something of life forms elsewhere. You see that they're reaching a trimester. And it's possible that they could reach this trimester, and then this trimester, and then this trimester. And this trimester means that they would be then leaving the planet at this trimester, and then they would leave and go here, and they'd have to learn that, and then they'd have to learn this. And then it's wondering how far ahead you really are. Are they going to catch up fast? Is that going to be a problem? Is that going to not be a problem? Because, when's the best time to deal with a weed? Yeah, we often clean out the gardens and stuff, right? Got to pull these out. I left this one a bit too long. Have you seen the size of these things in here? I've got no grass left. You should have dealt with that, nipped that in the bud a little bit sooner, right? And I think that's why you calculate. That's why you look at life forms and different things like that. To be able to calculate to see whether we have a problem. Here, in a hierarchy structure, we're probably doing the same thing. It's on a smaller scale, I suppose, but nonetheless, it's training, I suppose. Yeah, it's in a weird and wonderful world. But again, if you had a lot of capabilities that they didn't catch up to, and then depending on how many leaps and laps you've done versus how far you've got with this, I mean, that's going to take a long time. So again, to calculate how long that would take, well, quite a while. And then the species projection and trajectory that they're going into. Are they eliminating one another? Are they focused on destroying? Are they focused on healing? Are they focused on fixing? Is it all about different parts? Is most of the species perhaps ill from bad food or this, that, and the other? These become variable questions that give you an outcome. Pretty good outcome as to where they're going to go. Long-term calculation in this way. It becomes very interesting. And be able to move things like this, then it all depends on how far do they doubt things. What is their belief system on this? Can they see forward? Are they futuristic or are they in the here and now? Can they see long term? Are they thinking about this? Are they thinking about that? Can you help them think about this? Can you help them find peace? Can you help them find balance? Can you help them reach to a higher platform? Interesting, very interesting questions. Again, stuff like this becomes very hard to believe. We always want to dismiss it. And again, this factors into a calculation. How much self-limiting belief do they have as individuals is fascinating, but how much do you have as a species? That's kind of a lot of people, isn't it? Wouldn't you think? You come out and say something, people will disbelieve that straight away. That's a problem. That is a big problem. That can bite you in the ass, because if people are lagging in that and your whole structure is based on people, then what the people think often will then bring you down into the pecking order. So therefore, that's going to stagnate you. Are they ill? Are they not? Are they healthy? Are they not? Is the food good? Is it bad? Have you learned things about this, this, and this? Do you know what the optimal operating system is? All of these things become variables as to give an out-term calculation of how far along you are. Isn't that interesting? So the God profile, that's an interesting one. I made that up, by the way, but still, it's possible. Or the universal profile. How far along are you? Are you going to make it or not? And again, these calculations. And then where do you fit on that spectrum? And again, how do you see that spectrum if you don't see any other life forms, any other ET? You don't see the spectrum of how far along you've come, how far you can go. And yeah, it's all reciprocal. Sure, you've got zoos and you've got pens, and you rear animals and eat animals and life forms. It's possible that others could do this. And it is possible, it's unlikely, but still it's possible to think about it. Could we have been put here by ET as a type of petting zoo? A zoo being one. Two, are we here as food source? That's another thing to think about. Could we be? And just like you do with an elephant, I suppose, where you peg it down from a young age, from a young species, developing species, peg it down. Well, it doesn't really break away from that stake when it gets older, even though it's got the strength to do so and the capability to do so, it doesn't pull away. And then are they teaching each other to be self-limiting? Because if it is, then the whole species is self-limiting. That's an interesting thing. You can put down a few word plays. So can you hypnotize them? That's another thing. Are they aware of their weaknesses? Because again, this would require great firewalls built around that structure. Because if you don't understand it, are you susceptible to certain things? Yes, we are. Are we doing those things and broadcasting it? Yes or no? If you are, you're sending out a signal. Can others see this and use this against you in a negative way? The answer is yes. Is it possible? Is it likely? It's probably unlikely. But the more the universe evolves and the longer you stay around for, these are probable. And in a very short amount of time, humans, and we're going to look at the mindsets of the ancients, seem to have known a lot of stuff. Now, one, did they know it? Were they listening to a divine spark? Two, were they infiltrated to believe this? Three, was that signal taken over by other life forms? Four, is there any capabilities for that? But again, you might not believe it because there's self-limiting belief. That you would find that absolutely impossible from your standpoint. But if you left and traversed the universe, it would change your perspective. You would find, my word, this is pretty easy. Okay, now we found some other life forms. Okay, now we found it's being able to think forwards like that in a what if. You don't live on ifs or buts, but you do protect yourselves. Are you easy to be susceptible to being, right, we know this with animals, you can tuck the head underneath a wing and it will lay there. Draw a line, get a chicken to concentrate, and it's mainly hypnotized. These things, what's the human version of that? Finding that would be something, because you can then begin to safeguard yourselves against it. A lot of these things have become, why do you have that mechanism in you? Was it taught? Was it placed? Did something else study you first and put it there? These are all possibilities, yes. Yeah, don't get me wrong. There could be this universal signal that travels through all of us. Now, if the ancients were quite advanced in thinking about stars, thinking about gods, deities, we could either say deity, yes, perhaps, unlikely, but maybe. We could also say alien, ET. Now, what were their intentions? Again, do we know? Not really. Limited information, language has been lost, irony, irony, irony. These are all possibilities. Or did they just think it up themselves? Something led them to think this way and this way. And again, another possibility. Probably likely. All of them seem to be unlikely and likely all in the same measure. But there are 3, maybe 4 different versions of which way they could have got this information. I can dress this up and make it so that they were tricked by ET as a food source. Maybe they come back later. Who knows? There's one. That's that one. 2 is that they followed this God code inside them, and perhaps the Creator had greater plans for them, being universal, hermaphrodite, otherwise spiritual, and everything else. Yes, this is very possible. Then that would correlate onto the next one of ET. Does ET share that same belief system, and does all life forms seem to go towards that same thought process? We can say no, not all life forms, because what about animals? However, we don't know because we've never tapped into their minds before. So we don't know what they're thinking. It's possible that they could be thinking deities and, who knows what's inside animals' minds. But we've never found a way to interpret that until we put something in, some technology, and then it's like, whoa, shit, me, man. They're also thinking about spirits, deities, and bloodlines, and paradigm shift once again, updates your data bank, and more you know, the more you play with, and then you start looking at that a little bit more. Maybe they don't. But there again, have we ever met any other intelligent life forms elsewhere? No. Have we ever met any other animals elsewhere? No. Have we ever met any other? No. Nature? No. This, that, and the other. But we do see planets, we do see stars. Is it possible that life could rise up there? I guess the possibility is yes, because the way things spread. So you can then begin to interpret this. Next question is, if we did meet intelligent life forms, would they share this same higher frequency and different things like that? The answer could be yes. Got to check the timer and the battery on this one. Whoosh, 22%. Yeah, we'll keep going with that. So, yeah, what we begin to find is when we ask these quality questions, we can then formulate a better answer to understand this stuff. It would be interesting to be knowing as opposed to thinking. Usually people think and then they do things and then it becomes known. So we have seen this pattern happen. Now, what is in control of that pattern? We could say it's just humans. Well, everyday humans stepped out of the matrix of being animal and then started doing some very strange things that were different to the animals. The animals with similarly sort of time, and some more time than we've got, didn't do this. Interesting as to how these were awoken. Something picked it. And whether it was evolving, lightning strikes, or different things like that, perhaps. And then we could ask another question on top of that. Is lightning elsewhere? And I think we'll find the answer is yes. Now, is lightning from here on this planet to another planet, is it doing the same thing? Striking at the same ratio, the same processes? Possible. Is lightning bolts here any different to lightning bolts on another Earth-like planet elsewhere? I'm going to say that the answer is no. I'm going to say it's very similar to each other, so I'll say yes. But no, it's not different, but yes, it's very much the same. If it's the same, and it's got the same ingredients, single cells or whatever else, then is it possible that it can supercharge an intelligence up some of these? The answer is yes. Interesting. If these come together, can they formulate with extra intelligence? Probably. Again, this could seem unlikely because the animal's intelligence seems laxed, and therefore we were a variable that was struck at the right ratio, and then perhaps two single cells were struck that forged them together, and you would think that that would be more common. So could it be explained away with lightning? Probably not. What about evolving? Probably not, because then there would be a time limit on this evolving, and then that means that humans are older, placed here with these. But again, that poses another question. There's another possibility. Ooh, there's lots of different variables here, isn't there? Different ways that you can go into this. Well, that's up to you to think about that. But let's just say life rises up in a natural sort of process along these sort of lines. Then is intelligent life going to be elsewhere? I think the answer will be yes. Now, will it share the same inner wisdom? It's a possibility, isn't it? After all, if no one put it into us. And then there are two types of learning this. One is internal, authentic. And two is there external. Are we taught it by other life forms? And then that would be an interesting question. Could we teach monkeys to have a spiritual awakening? That's a question, isn't it? Interesting. Could we find other primitive life forms that eerily mimic what humans are on another planet, acting in a very similar sort of way? And could we go down and teach them? Two types of teaching. One, they will see, hear us clippity-clappity talking to one another. Interesting. And then they begin to do the same thing. And then when they see us with all of this equipment that comes down to their planet, could they then begin to unlock something in their brain that thinks, wait a minute, and can you begin to teach them certain things by showing them, because you're more intelligent than they are, or they appear, maybe primitive, but can we show them by doing something in front of them with the materials that are on their planet, because you got it from your history, and then you teach it to them, then you've got them on a starting point. Interesting. Maybe they're not exactly identical, but they have the same blueprints of what humans have. You know, there's two types of teaching. Factor that in with authentic and being taught outside of you. And there could be life forms come down and teach humans it, and then perhaps they went off and met into a very disastrous situation, and there's none of them left now. You are the fragments of what they passed on, or they went off and they carry on evolving elsewhere. They bounce from place to place teaching life forms. Who knows? That's interesting. And then where do your capabilities? And then at the time you're awoken or evolved or whatever it may be, or reach this divine spark, has anything else met that divine spark sooner than you? This cycle, has it survived? Has it learnt? Has it traversed? And then where do you sit on that hierarchy? And then who is telling the truthful story in all of these? I mean, that's interesting. And I often wonder about this whole channeling thing. That, you know, some of this stuff that I come out, I've not been educated, not at all. In some ways I have, and in some ways I haven't. Failed all of my exams, was pretty much badass all through school. Not terrible badass, no, just really terrible at English, fucking spellings, maths, all that shit. Very bad at it. And I seem to be able to pull this sort of stuff out. Doesn't mean I'm better, I'm just different. And some other people are absolutely fluent in that stuff and actually are pretty damn intelligent with all of that stuff. So, who's more intelligent? Neither. Both have a different sort of way of reaching that intelligence, so learn to respect one another for the differences. But I often wonder that. Something else. What happens if I sat on a lie detector, perhaps, all the gizmos and gadgets, and I channeled? What's the data that comes from there? What if it says that all of this is lying and the other person is telling the truth? Or perhaps you take two people with different ways of getting intelligence And it says that both of them are lying. Does that mean that what we perceive as truth, it might be lie, and lie might be truth? Again, another question to ask. I am just not sure. But even if we were to do a lie detector in this, what would those results look like? I mean, that's an interesting question that I have. Or an EEG machine, what part of the brain is lighting up? Is it different to being taught intelligence as opposed to finding it as you go? Pattern recognition is my forte. I like that. And some other people are more intelligent in other aspects. They have a passion for it, and I find it amazing. Mathematicians especially, that's amazing stuff. I can't get my head around it, but again, I love geometry. That is different to me, and perhaps it's your version of geometry for you. Wow, fascinating that is. And I often wonder what happens if you rig these people up to EEG machines, lie detectors, and different things like that. What would be the results? Or is there any type of machinery that we can use to test people, heart rhythm and different things, and clusters? And I know some people probably do it from facial and different stuff like that, but how do you know people are telling the truth? Wouldn't that be a beautiful thing? Because anyone that channeled with these great revelations and stuff and comes out with this stuff would be like, these are telling the truth. It seems to be some sort of, the equipment seems to be okay. Well, how does this work in this study? That would be interesting. And then it gives you some more data as you become the super teachers, because then you can help refine these people on this, can't you? Which then begins to open out more mindsets, and setting people off on their destined paths could be more beneficial than anything. That would be interesting. Whew. Always a place for this sort of stuff. Anyway, I always ask these questions. Anyway, I'm going to start to wind down. I want to get something to eat. So it's a little bit hit and miss, but yeah. When you do things in this biome, it almost seems that the more you work out, you get to rebuild and block your life form, your species. The technology always seems to point towards creating more of a strengthened. It almost seems to want to make you more indestructible and longevity, live longer. And then I wonder if there are ET, would they follow this principle? And if they did, would they follow this pattern? And did they end up starting off at this pattern as primitive and throwing and blowing one another up, or whatever else it may be, and hierarchical? And if it is, do they shift away from that moment? Do they shift more into it? These are questions. And this gives me a calculation, really, of how many become more grounded, although they're in space. And then hearing what astronauts say, I just wonder if there's ever been a rehabilitation program. It would be a weird one, but hey, Elon, we've seen some stranger things. Hear me out for a second. What happens if you took one of the most evilest criminals out into space on their own journey? They get to see all of that. Will they come back changed, peaceful, and find a new sense of being? And can you really change? Because you hear it with NASA. When they go to space, they definitely come back changed. There's a change there. I mean, a rehabilitation program has been right above our heads the whole time, and we didn't realize it. I don't know. Or does it make them worse? Because there's no data on criminals in space, in zero G. Well, there is. People seems to amplify their nicer and serene and patient. And is that the training that goes in before? Or is that the change that happens when they're in space? And just realize, does it make people appreciate more? And then if the species go to space, will they become more appreciative to life and the structures that they build? And does this make them more determined to, protect that as opposed to fall out in that? Or is it absolute anarchy and we'll see the whole Star Wars thing, battles, and it makes it worse? Is it money that makes you more of what you are? Is it fame that makes you more of what you are? Or does space make you more of what you are? I just wonder that. Does it really chill them down? That's interesting data in itself, really. I mean, rehabilitation, that is an expensive rehabilitation program, I must admit, but still. Experiments, right? Human behavior? I mean, that kind of aligns up to that. That is a weird thing, but still. When looking from a distance and what is not seen, does that make you truly protected? Does it make you calculate accurately? Are we all doing these things in order to take the next step? Is this a telltale sign of we're ready for the next step? variables in humanity are one thing, but species with next to no data on them, they become variables, and then the more you see they are more variables, and then trying to get an understanding on this, that's an interesting thing, isn't it? Testing, in a way. Anyway, I'll dive into this on another date. I'm going to wind this one down now, but still. What do you reckon? Shrink yourself. Well, expands your resources. Yeah. Expand yourself. Well, and again, factor it into this twinning, either or. Well, if you can become bigger, could you walk on Jupiter? If you could make clones. That's if, big if. But it's a possibility. To me, that's something that can happen. The more you keep going with stuff, I think eventually that becomes a reality, not a thought. It seems more logical. It's all the universe seems to follow this principle. Almost offers you this in front of you by teaching you these patterns, and sort of says, if I can do it, so can you. If I'm intelligent, so are you. Whatever you want to call it. So yeah, if you become bigger and more of a better structure, can you withstand walking on any planet that you want? And then how does protection look in that? Well, sure, you've got a bigger planet, but you're more bigger and able to take it. If you can get more smaller and also factor in this and be able to take it, well, any life forms that haven't reached that trimester in that moment means that you are protected. Anything that they could possibly send into that would break apart. Then if you could get into inside a star or black hole and be unaffected by it, if they followed you in, they're devoured. It's an interesting thing, isn't it? Chase. Oof, protection. Shells. Home. Interesting. But yeah, there you are. I'm going to leave it there. Just a few thoughts for you to think about.